Good morning and good afternoon to all of you who have joined us today. I'm Rich Greenberg, President of ISSA Los Angeles. Welcome to our monthly meeting. We've got a great one today. And before we get going with our speaker, let me share a few things about who we are. Here's our board of directors, a wonderful group of people who I'm proud to say work as hard, if not harder than me, to put on these events and our yearly summit, which will hopefully come back one day. But we love to do things for our community to get everybody involved. We have trainings that we try to put on at either reduced rates or for free, as well as the speakers that you see normally. Come visit our website if you haven't before, ISSA-LA.org, pretty easy to remember. And you can sign up for future notifications. You won't get a lot of spam. You'll get information about when events are occurring. And you can also help your careers because you'll be interacting with fellow InfoSec peers. So join us. I want to give a shout out to our educational sponsors. These folks have offered discounts to all of you. If you go to our site, ISSA-LA.org, you will see these sponsors listed, and you can click on those links and avail yourself of some of what they have to offer. Education should never stop. We should all grow forever and continue learning. We all know that. Our social media presence is in a variety of platforms. We even have Instagram for those of you who are under 30, as well as the old Facebook and Meetup and Twitter and LinkedIn. Do look for us and follow us and engage in conversation and post some stuff to our sites so we can get a little dialogue going. We try to hit on a lot of the current topics that we are seeing, that we're challenged with, both breaches and ways to counteract that. So I hope to see you there. We have a very, very interesting panel coming up on ransomware. We've got 3 practitioners and an FBI agent from Los Angeles who will be discussing both what happens in a ransomware, how you deal with it, and some lessons learned as well. Ransomware, unfortunately, has taken on a heightened level of interest and concern among not just us, but it's reached the boardroom, which is, I guess, good and bad, right? Because they're the ones that control the purse strings and also decide on priorities. And it's good that ransomware has gotten their attention, but there's a lot of good takeaways from here. Is no magic bullet for ransomware defense. You want a full defense in depth. You're in a mature security plan, but there are certain things that you can learn from this. So I highly recommend you join us. Our meetings are always on the 3rd Wednesday. They're either at lunch or in the evening. Today, obviously, it's at lunch. Next meeting will be at 5:30 Pacific Daylight Time. Actually, no, I think it's changed. It will no longer be daylight time, but you get the idea. So I hope you can join us for that one. That should be an eye-opener. The way we work, obviously, if you're watching this, you are aware that we're streaming this live on YouTube. However, if you want to ask questions of the speaker, and Christopher would actually prefer that you enter questions as he goes. And so if you just go to this link, app.sli.do, it's not a hacking site, don't worry. Go to that site and you just have to enter the code ISSA-LA, and you can choose whether to be anonymous or you can put your name in. We're fine either way, and just type your questions. And as you type your questions, then we will transpose that into our chat here, and Christopher can answer them. Again, he would like this a little interactive. He's got a lot of great things to share from all his years of experience. And I'm sure he will stimulate you. So don't hold back. If you got a question, shoot it across. A little bit about our esteemed speaker today, Chris Cleary. He's been with the Department of Navy. He was named their new Chief Principal Cyber Advisor in November of 2020. In this role, he's responsible for advising the Secretary of the Navy, Chief of Naval Operations, and the Commandant of the Marine Corps, and implementing the Department of Defense Cyber Strategy within the Department of the Navy. Now, prior to that, he was appointed as the first CISO and director of the CIO Cybersecurity Directorate. So he's got a long esteemed history. He's got some work in the private sector as well. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Christopher. I really want to thank you for agreeing to share with us. I know that this brings a different take to cybersecurity than we've gotten in a lot of the recent speakers. So we'd love to hear what your experience in government and military is bringing to the table. So it's all yours, my friend. Thank you again.
Hey, thanks, Richard. And I'm assuming you guys can hear me okay. And look, time zone change, right? So it's a beautiful, Wednesday afternoon. How we're on the East Coast, beginning to cool off a little bit. I know out in California, you guys are still dealing with all the craziness from yesterday, right? So glad that's different. All right, not talk politics. Anyways, so again, Rich, thanks for having me. I'll just go a little bit more into my background, just to give you the folks on the call a better flavor for who I am. Again, as Richard spelled out, as things pop into your heads as we're going through, I kind of like to make these things as interactive as possible. If you got questions, hit me up. If you want to call me out on something that I said as we're going along, feel free. Because a lot of what I say is meant to be a little stimulate thought, maybe even a little bit of debate. I don't perceive to be 100% right in all of my views and opinions. So I look to be challenged from time to time, because again, nobody's got all the right answers. So again, about me, yeah, I'm the principal cyber advisor for the Department of the Navy. Been doing this job for coming up on a year. Prior to that, I was the CISO for the Department of the Navy for about a year. My background includes, I enlisted in the Navy right out of high school. A couple of years of doing that, was working on F-18s and doing avionics on that airframe. Weaseled my way into the Naval Academy, graduated, went surface warfare, was a ship driver for a couple of years. After that, I lateraled to the intelligence community. And this is where the Navy started trying to figure out, so this is circa 2000, 2001. And the Navy was trying to build intelligence officers that had some technical background, so they could sort of understand information warfare, cyber, information operations. I had no desire to do this at the time. I was sort of, placed in this environment, not knowing where it would get me. And I as an intelligence officer, started becoming kind of a cyber guy. I spent my first tour at the Office of Naval Intelligence. I was the information assurance officer and the network security officer for O&I, for all the different classification domains and networks that we had. But then, the industry was looking good. I was living in DC, having a security clearance and speaking IT, the world was your oyster. 2003, I decided to get out, went to stayed in the reserves. From then to now, I bounced between a bunch of different, if anybody's looked me up on LinkedIn or my bio, I've worked for a bunch of defense contractors at times. I've worked for Verizon as a client partner, a tech startup that failed miserably, a tech startup that went public. And in between there was recalled to active duty a couple different times, deployed to Iraq on a few different occasions. One time was with the Joint Special Operations Command before everybody knew what those guys did, so that was kind of cool. And then my second deployment to Iraq was actually with US Cyber Command, running cyber operations in Iraq circa 2010, 2011. Left there, went back into industry, and eventually found my way back into the Department of the Navy. Okay, well, why? So a couple of years ago, the Navy did this cyber readiness review, which was looking at the way we were doing principally cybersecurity through the department. And what the conclusions they came to were, hey, we could do this better. So the CIO, who was an 06 at the time, Navy captain, what they decided to do is sort of empower the Chief Information Office within the Department of the Navy, elevate the CIO to a direct report to the Secretary, and then give him 4 principal direct reports, one of which being the first ever Chief Information Security Officer for the Department of the Navy. I was asked to come back into the department to do this role. I was flattered that I was even considered, but went back and, a year later, the Congress had decided that what they really were looking for was better synchronization and coordination of cyber sort of things within the department. And they mandated that each of the departments appoint what they call a principal cyber advisor. And again, maybe name picked out of a hat, but I was appointed the principal cyber advisor, and then sort of elevated to, I guess you could call a peer of the CIO, separate and distinct, no longer in that organization, to cover down mostly on the things that Congress thought that we needed a little more attention on. And this is sort of where I'll get into the crux of the conversation. So, and I see a question, why did it take so long for the Navy to name a CISO? To that, the Navy and Marine Corps at their respective services had organizations that did security already, and you could argue they had CISOs. At the department level, from a coordination standpoint, maybe to give the whole thing a little more visibility, it never existed for the Department of the Navy. And that was the unique thing, and it was to really oversee what both the Navy and the Marine Corps were doing. But that's a good question. So I'll get to that other one here in a second. So where the CIO function and the PCA function sort of separate, and this is kind of unique to the military. I would argue that this doesn't really exist in all shapes and forms in civilian industry or the different organizations that you guys represent who are listening on the call. The principal cyber advisor, where I come to play, is really the war fighting functions of what the department's doing. And then if the heading of this presentation I want to give was this, cyber warfare, time to get serious, because we've traditionally only seen, or for the most part, cyber, when you said that word, immediately was followed by security. In almost every context, cybersecurity, the cybersecurity readiness review, the report that was written by the Department of the Navy, mostly focused on cybersecurity and the need to consolidate or better coordinate cybersecurity functions across the Navy. But we've also come to the conclusion that when it comes to the three major categories of the things that have the word cyber in them for the Department of the Navy is, of course, cybersecurity, which I've already kind of beaten to death. The next one would be cyber resiliency. Inside of cyber resiliency, we sort of coined that as where we put our, critical infrastructure and weapon systems. And for those of you who are familiar with some of the National Defense Authorization language, there's a section called 1647, another one called 1650, which respectively call out 47 is weapon systems, 1650 is critical infrastructure, and sort of the addressing of those sort of outside what we do in traditional enterprise IT security. And then as you move farther to the right, you get into cyber operations. And then for the connotation of cyber operations, specifically for the Department of Defense, we're talking about more of the war fighting functions, where the mission force lives, the acquisition of offensive and defensive cyber capabilities, day-to-day maneuvering of our networks in response to adversary activities. Responding to solar winds would be an example, or rolling tide, for those of you who are familiar with that event that happened a couple of years for the Navy. Those all would sort of fall under the bucket of cyber operations. All right, so why do I sort of focus on war fighting? Within each of the departments, I would argue that cyber is still struggling to find its proper place amongst its other kinetic warfighting brethren. So within Navy speak, I'm talking about the surface warfare community, the guys that drive ships, our undersea warfare, submariners, aviation, airplanes, special, naval special warfare, our SEAL communities, and then our respective kinetic arms within the Marine Corps, our, amphibious forces that the Marines all, man and equip and train. But when you get into cyber, I've been trying to focus people around what I like to call the three questions, right? So you'll hear this kicked around from time to time, this idea of, hey, we really got to get to the root of what we're trying to solve for within the department. And I've coined them as these three questions. And the first one is cyber a warfighting domain? In today's day and age, you find very people who wouldn't acknowledge that cyber is a warfighting domain. They would definitely say it publicly or verb, yes, of course, cyber is a warfighting domain. But then the question is, do they really believe it? Do they say it because it's kind of the PC thing to do these days, that of course cyber is a warfighting domain? but do they really believe it? Do they really want to champion it and such? The aviation community and the Navy would say, of course, cyber is a warfighting domain, but if you give me $1 more, I'm going to go buy another Joint Strike Fighter, as opposed to maybe spending money on cybersecurity or offensive or defensive acquisition of capability. The second question is, which is the more interesting question when presented to the services, is, and I'll use the Department of the Navy, is the Department of the Navy going to consider cyber a core competency in the way that it delivers effects against its adversaries? Again, take me back to what I had said about submarines and surface ships and aircraft. Those are the principal means and methods of warfare that the Navy has professionalized in over hundreds of, in some cases, hundreds of years, as a warfighting function. The way that we, again, deliver or engage our adversaries, or provide capability to joint force commanders, so then they can obviously go, quote unquote, engage our adversaries. So if you've answered yes to the first two questions, the third question is a little more specific. It's me kind of leading the witness a little bit to acknowledge that the Navy's got to do a little bit of a better job, which is, how is the Department of the Navy going to take a leadership role in the creation of the environment that we would use to fight in, the capabilities, the tools. Some of you on the phone call might be familiar with a term called JICWA, the Joint Cyber Warfighting Architecture. How is the Navy going to fully contribute, fully participate in the development of this environment, and then train forces that would then operate in and within this environment when it comes to the sort of the non-kinetic activities for the things that we do. Well, the roadblocks that we kind of run into when we get to the warfighting side of cyber is, once again, I'm not sure if there's anybody on the call who went to the War College, or any of my War College brethren out there, but this idea of the 5 C's. There's a theory that you learn going through the War College, deterrence theory, deterrence strategy. It's mostly was sort of formulated around nuclear deterrence. And we came with this idea of the 5 C's, which is capability, capacity, credibility, communication, and commitment. For you to have a fully formulated deterrence strategy, you had to sort of fill out the 4 C's, and from a nuclear deterrence strategy, yeah, I've got nuclear weapons, I've got a whole bunch of them. Credibility comes from the fact that maybe I've used one, the United States being the only country that's actually ever used one in war. And then our commitment to use it in the future and communicating that fact, right? So that's a nuclear deterrence strategy. Well, when you looked at the 5 C's through the lens of cyber, I cherry picked the words a little bit. And, when cyber became a thing and we all started doing cyber stuff, we started throwing money at capability and capacity. And I would argue that it's sort of all over the place within all of the services, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps. But what we never really did is prove that it was a credible capability. And what do I mean by that? We've inferred, or at least we give credit to our adversaries, that they are very, very credible at what they do. We've seen it, right? SolarWinds. My little joke about SolarWinds is, when we go to the National Hacker Awards this year, we will all begrudgingly get up and give the Russians a polite round of applause as they go to accept their award for the SolarWind attack. You have to appreciate for what it is. It was pretty amazing, right? I mean, it was pretty sophisticated and very well executed. So again, give credit where credit is due. So they are a credible adversary. They've demonstrated they can do these things. We typically like to operate below the radar, and that's just the way that we are. We haven't started doing sort of public things, or things that we would maybe not want attributed to us, but with a wink and a nod, yeah, hey, that was us. So we don't play in those waters, or at least we don't play there just yet. But as the services go to build capability, the other warfighting communities have to see the information warfare community. They're sort of where those capabilities are housed as a credible warfighting function, to which point then the Navy could decide that, hey, we're going to commit to this, and then communicate to the rest of the services that this is going to be a core warfighting function for the Department of the Navy. Again, I would say the Army and the Air Force are struggling down similar paths. There was an interesting transition when moving from the Chief Information Security Officer over to the PCA, because as the CISO, going back to national defense strategy, one of the core tenets of the previous administration's national defense strategy was this idea of increasing lethality. At the end of the day, this is what a military is. This is what a military does. A military delivers lethalities against our adversary, or the threat of lethality. Well, all right. In the chief information security officer role, you're not the delivering of lethality, but you are on the receiving end of some of that lethality. And what I mean by that is, not lethality is, with the definition term of it, but if an adversary can reduce the effectiveness of some of our systems, their kinetic lethality delivered against us might be that much more effective. So I would say it's not only the ability to deliver lethality against our adversaries, but also to withstand the lethality that they wish to deliver upon us. And when we look at the kinds of means and methods of warfare that we're moving into, non-kinetic warfare is kind of being accepted as it might be the way that our next conflict begins and ends. If I can reduce your ability to be effective, if I can engage your critical infrastructure, if I can limit your ability to use weapon systems against me using non-kinetic means and methods of warfare, well, the fight might be over. So we have to be prepared to sort of withstand that, non-kinetic, phase zero, right? The things that are going to happen before a shooting war starts, and be able to do that. So as we move into this idea of warfare, this idea of what is warfare, in my opinion, is beginning to change. And I think we're in a very interesting time, because not all warfare is kinetic. Clausewitz, right? For those of you, again, to bore you with my war college background, Clausewitz, I think we're all familiar with the line that he uses, that war is just a continuation of politics through other means. But what is war? War is simply getting your adversary to succumb to your will, to do what it is that you want them to do. And for centuries, it was the threat of physical violence, the threat of actual warfare, which got other nations to capitulate, or to be a little more amenable to what you were trying to go do. And we've seen that happen even recently. You could look at the Russians' invasion of Crimea as a good example, right? Physical occupation of territory, with not as much pushback, even globally. You could even argue we didn't do a good enough job of getting them out of there. But when you look at the way that warfare is changing, principally around our peer adversaries, or our near peer adversaries, the Russians and the Chinese, there's lots of ways they like to engage us that don't necessarily involve traditional kinetic warfare. Two Chinese colonels, I can't pronounce their names, I butcher them all the time, in 1999 wrote a very interesting book called Unrestricted Warfare. And what this book basically talks about is, the first rule in warfare is there are no rules. And not to confuse this idea of unrestricted warfare with what we're more commonly used to as idea of total war. Total war is a Clausewitzian, Mahan sort of construct, which is all about, dominating your adversary, overpowering them, decimating their forces. When you look at the way that the Chinese have sort of postulated this idea of unrestricted warfare, it's not that it's not total war, it's leveraging other means and methods of warfare to achieve those same end states. They watched in 1999 our first Gulf War and the way that we worked as a joint force. They learned a lot of lessons from that. They saw that when it came to traditional warfare, maneuver warfare, combined arms operations, the US is pretty good at it. So why do I want to engage you there? I may not want to ever engage you there. I might want to go around those things. So you could argue the Russians manipulating elections, the Chinese stealing intellectual property. I just saw there was a story earlier this week about the idea that the Chinese were creating hundreds and hundreds of fake social media accounts, just again to shape opinion and to get into the social headspace, the cognitive space of where we all think and live, because that's at the end of the day the real target, right? Getting in the gray matter of your adversary and making him do things that you want him to do. And maybe it's not always the threat of force that gets you to do that. So the reason this scares me to one degree or another, I'll take a sip, excuse me, is there's another construct that I'm a big fan of. It's this idea of the Thucydides trap. For those of you who may or not be familiar with this Thucydides trap, I'll give you a quick little background on it. Again, it was Graham Allison, a professor at Harvard, kind of coined this idea. And what the Thucydides trap is, so there was Thucydides, the Greek philosopher, and the Peloponnesian Wars, he's sort of credited as the first historian, at least the first guy who wrote stuff down on paper to be recorded. The Peloponnesian Wars, what he said, it was more the idea of it was a rising power and an established power, and the rising power would basically compel or threaten the established power into him having to do something about it. So the idea was, you had Athens, you had Sparta, and it was idea that said it was the rise of Athens and the fear instilled in Sparta that made war inevitable. He commissioned this study. He looked at the last 500 years. He saw there were 20 instances where this happened, 16 of which resulted in war. His process, if you looked at where China and the US are now, this idea of the Thucydides trap construct was being thing. So I see another question. Are we finally going to take cyber defense seriously? Let me get to that. All right, that's a good segue because it kind of feeds into where we're going. So I like the word cyber defense. I like the way that question is formulated because in my opinion, there are two very specific and distinct things that we're going to do in cybersecurity and cyber defense. Cybersecurity is static. Cybersecurity is locked doors and windows. We're getting better at that. That is the things that CMMC are implementing, the NIST framework. Cyber defense is dynamic. Even Chris Inglis, who's the new national cyber director, I think he was coined just the other day as saying, this idea of, we might get to a point where we have to fire a cyber bullet, right? Well, whatever that means, we can say, an offensive cyber operations, in a time and place of our choosing. But this idea of taking cyber defense seriously, well, I think we're there. I think we are taking cyber defense seriously. We're definitely spending lots of resources. The Navy spends somewhere in the order of $1 billion a year on cybersecurity. Depending on who you are, that might sound like a lot of money. It might not sound like enough. But then the question is, what are you getting for that money? And these are a lot of the debates that we're having internal to the department right now, because there's a lot of folks who like to say we buy cyber by the pound. Well, I'm just going to throw another $100 million at it. I'm going to go buy the latest and greatest tool. I'm going to go adopt the latest and greatest widget, and my problems are going to go away. Well, I for one, and I've been vocal about this inside the department, is, there is no silver bullet that is going to solve us. For those of you who are familiar with Simon Sinek, another guy who also formulates my opinion, this idea of an infinite game. Cyber and cybersecurity, it's just like any other large thing we get into, are infinite games. There's no winner in cybersecurity. It's a problem that can be managed. There's no perfect tool we're going to roll out because it's just going to be something else that the adversary needs to now figure out how to get around. There's no perfect weapon. The Joint Strike Fighter is not the last airplane we're going to make. The Virginia-class submarine is not the last submarine. We're going to continue to improve upon these. Our adversaries are going to figure out ways to get around them. So when we look at the latest and greatest topic of conversation, zero trust, if we want to get back into the specifics of cyber and cybersecurity, zero trust is fantastic. I'm a fan of zero trust and zero trust principles. But again, it's not a product, it's a construct, it's a concept. It's something to sort of be embraced and adopted, to acknowledge that you can't trust your environment, and all machines are compromised. And how do I pass information around knowing that everything probably has adversary activity going on it, which leads to this idea of zero trust. I lock all my doors and windows, but if you get in my house, you have access to everything. Well, now I'm going to lock everything, and you need passwords to touch everything. Great idea. There's a lot of fundamental things that need to happen for a zero trust environment to be possible. Identity and identity management comes to mind, right? You need a strong identity construct within your organization before you can really get to a good zero trust principle. So there's another non-trivial thing that most organizations have to struggle with before they can even get to a good zero trust construct. But again, this idea of, are we taking cyber defense seriously? What I would say is, what's going to be next, right? Because even if we get to a perfectly rolled out zero trust environment, there's going to be something that comes after that. There's going to be some other horizon that we begin to chase within zero trust, because that's not going to be the last thing. Because if you guys, everybody on this call who's a cybersecurity professional or practitioner knows that, it wasn't that long ago, actually, probably just, within a year or so, it was all comply to connect. And, before that, it was, layered defense. And before that, it was, hey, just go buy a firewall or intrusion detection or intrusion prevention system. This environment has continued to mature. Our adversary continues to get better at what they do. Because going back to this idea of what are the means and methods of warfare that we're going to be facing in the future, it's this. It's non-kinetic warfare. It's information operations, information warfare. Now, those are all loaded terms that I would acknowledge. There's even not necessarily, there's clear definitions if you want to pick up military manuals and see joint pubs and how the joint staff has come up with the definitions of all of those things, but they're all kind of open still to debate. People use them interchangeably, and and would argue over the specifics of the ideas information operations or information warfare, non-kinetic. I've used a lot of jargon, right? So anybody listening to the sound of my voice, I'm sure there's eye rolling going on out there, right? This idea of we've heard all of this before, and to some degree, I would agree with everybody on this call. I'm sure there's not too much that anybody within the sound of my voice has heard that is overly exciting, or I got it. I've heard all this before, and trust me, I roll my eyes at a lot of the conversations that I hear too. But what is the larger point? I'm going to go back to sort of the why the PCA existed within the department, and it really wasn't to talk to the cybersecurity organization or even the components within the Navy that are being tasked with working through the cyber warfare problems. It was taking this idea of cyber outside of all of those communities and bringing them over to the people who don't ever really think about cyber, other than the fact that they have to take their user test once a year and answer 9 out of 10 questions correctly before they can get access to their account again, right? The rolling of the eyes of the information assurance training that everybody has to do annually. And I'm sure within your respective companies, hell, you might be the people that are responsible for pushing out the user training, knowing that 99% of the workforce that is answering those questions in any respective organizations are rolling their eyes and cursing each one of you. They don't understand the problem as well as you do. They don't understand that every one of them is the aim point for your adversaries to get into every one of your organizations. What I think is even more interesting, guessing that I'm talking to most people in California, I guess I'm talking to most people that work for commercial companies. I'm not sure there's too many military folks on here. If there are, please chime in and let me know you're listening. Beat me up. But depending on the industries you're working in, you guys are the aim point. If you're building anything of any significance, of any new technology, the adversary is looking to go get your intellectual property. If you provide a service, I'm talking to mostly the critical infrastructure operators. If everybody's here that works at a power plant or natural gas, petroleum refinement, sewage and waste, right? Rail, communications, the food system, transportation. Those are all the aim points of our adversaries to degrade what we're doing. Because again, California, right? Los Angeles, I think Long Beach, the largest shipyard in the world, or at least one of them, lives in your backyard. Our adversaries are keenly interested in what goes on there. That is it. That is one of the biggest ports of from shipping and receiving in the world. There's not necessarily a lot of military functions that go there, but when it comes to sustainment of our forces at sea, a lot of those things that we need to do our jobs, I'm sure, originate there. So our adversary is going to take a unique interest in degrading that facility's ability to operate. And all up and down the Pacific seaboard, each of those shipyards, whether it's the maintenance of ships, the points of embark and debark for those kinds of equipments and goods and services, our adversaries are particularly aware. They know that, and they're going to be targeting those things. So the point that is, you guys are the aim point. You guys are the soft underbelly, because our adversaries don't necessarily have to engage you directly, engage the U.S. directly. They don't have to engage us at sea. And then I get into another sort of thought experiment when it gets into sort of Eastern and Western philosophies and the ways that we talk about, what is competition. We in the West have all sort of grown up with this idea that, chess, checkers, poker, football, baseball, there's set rules. There's something that determines when you're the winner. You've captured the king, you've taken all the pieces, you got all the money, you scored more points in a predetermined set amount of time. Well, that's great. That's the way we think. Our adversaries don't think that way. And if you want to get inside the headspace of some of our adversaries, the Chinese play a game called Go. Go, it looks like an Othello board, if for those of you. And I've started playing it as a goof just because I was told I should think this way. And Go is a game of envelopment. Go is a game of outmaneuvering your adversary. You could look like you're losing the entire game and put one more chip on the board and the game's over, you've enveloped. So it's a game of patience. It's a game of, thinking through long strategy. And if I can outmaneuver you, I can basically over a time, win, as opposed to having to engage you directly and defeat you. I can just put you into a position where, it's not in your best interest to defeat me. So I'll read another question. Yeah, so great question. What defines cyber warfare? Does it include misinformation attacks, critical infrastructure, critical components? How do we address that? Great question. So now you're going to lead me down another one of my rants. And the first one is this idea of the word attack. I think we in the commercial sector, and I'll put myself there. I used to work in the commercial sector, and I will most certainly go back to the commercial sector when I'm done with this. We have used that word attack. As a matter of fact, we've used it too much. We've used it to the point where it's begun to lose all meaning. In the Department of Defense, we have very, very clear definitions of what constituted attack. As a matter of fact, it's laws of armed conflict, rules of engagement. An attack is defined very specifically as something designed to kill people or destroy equipment. You can conduct an attack unsuccessfully, but it doesn't mean you didn't conduct an attack. So when you use that definition and you apply it to cyber operations, cyber warfare, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the thing called the Talon Manual, which is a book written by a bunch of lawyers that sort of goes through, if you took all laws of armed conflict, rules of engagement, Geneva Convention, treaties, and sort of overlaid cyber on all of that, what would it look like? And of course, they define in this book a cyber attack as very similar to the way the kinetic guys look at it, which it's something designed to destroy or kill. So if you haven't attempted to do those things, you haven't necessarily conducted an attack. There are certainly attacks that we have witnessed in cyber operations. Stuxnet comes to mind. That was certainly designed to destroy equipment. Saudi Aramco, Sony. Those are all what I would define as attacks because they destroyed stuff. They prevented an ability from doing their jobs by engaging equipment or, in the Sony, it was a response to a movie, blah, blah, blah. But the point is they broke things in the process. SolarWinds, if we were going to use SolarWinds through the definition of an attack, was it an attack? Did it break anything? I don't know. It was definitely espionage. It was definitely criminal activity. It was definitely, espionage if done by a nation state. It was definitely stuff we don't like happening. But I wouldn't constitute an attack because when you start getting into things that call an attack, you start getting into responses, right? The reason the military very clearly defines what an attack is because then he begins to trip rules of engagement. The ways commanding officers at sea or people in airplanes or on the ground can respond to these kind of activities up to and including lethal force at times. But when everything's called an attack, nothing has jumped to that level. It says, wow, we have to respond to this thing differently than the way we'd respond to more of this routine engagement. Now, SolarWinds could certainly be what we would call in the military preparation of the environment, depending on those kinds of organizations that found themselves on the receiving end of SolarWinds. If I was a critical infrastructure provider and SolarWinds was making its way around my environment, maybe it was there to implant stuff. Maybe it was a way to facilitate an attack in the future. But the idea of what is an attack, was it specifically an attack that we could respond to? I don't know, the lawyer, which is why I think more lawyers have to get involved in this and help begin to be a lot more clear with the way we use these words, because something that targeted critical infrastructure, you could argue that the Colonial Pipeline ransomware was an attack. It did degrade our ability to push. Now, I know it wasn't on the, when you get into when you start unpacking the actual Colonial Pipeline, event, so I won't call it an attack. Well, maybe I will call it an attack. It was on more their administrative sides. They were afraid that it had made it over into some of the critical infrastructure, the actual industrial control system side. They, took caution and shut everything down just to make sure it wasn't breaking anything. But it definitely impacted their ability to do their job. Now, if that was done in sequence with something else, you could absolutely, chalk that one up as an attack. We didn't, and maybe that was a mistake with the Colonial Pipeline that it could have been something that we used as an example to respond to differently. So I don't know if I answered that question good enough or not. But what we are getting into this idea of great power competition, that's something else you're going to hear in the Department of Defense that we kick around, this idea of, when we're, the Cold War, right? Great power competition is just another kind of way to say Cold War. We're having, engaging with our near peer adversaries, the Russians and the Chinese in particular, at a level below what we would call armed conflict, right? Competition. So but it doesn't mean you don't do things below the level of armed conflict that inhibit your ability to do other things. we sort of see it every day. The Commandant of the Marine Corps has begun to think very long and hard about what competition phase of warfare looks like with, our principal, again, the Russians and the Chinese, and what are the things that he is going to do as a Commandant to reshape his force that allows him to be able to compete with his adversaries below a shooting war, and reshaping and reformulating the way the Marine Corps is going to operate moving forward. Again, the Navy is struggling with a lot of these things as well. Richard, I'm gonna pause there for a little bit. And I don't know, I see a couple other things in the chat section. Let's see, on distributed maritime operations. Oh, so I'd say another question. Will the distributed maritime ops deliver on the promises idealized, leveraging subsurface? I'm guessing you said the cooperative engagement capability network provide an edge. Yeah, so I hope so, right? And I think one of the things there is for those of you on the West Coast, Nav War, Admiral Small, who is running a project called Project Overmatch, which is basically just that, trying to get, how do we leverage the availability of networks at sea better to basically get any information anywhere at any time. So I call that's the horizon that Project Overmatch is shooting for. Yeah, so I think, and the CEC is one of those capabilities that are all pieces and parts of that. What kind of strategies or what kind can you share about going from data to info ops? I don't know if I have a good answer there. Is there security in the open avionics architecture, such as NavAir, Syscom's mission computer, alternative MCA platforms, a host confirming? So again, I'm not as familiar with with the NavAir stuff in particular, but I did start my career as an avionics technician working on Hornets. You would figured I have a better answer for that one. So sorry, I don't have a good answer for that one. Why shouldn't we respond to all events that either attack us or steal our secrets as long as we know who's responsible? All right. So, all right, another one. Why shouldn't we respond to all events that either attack us or steal our secrets as long as we know who is responsible? I think we're moving towards that. What I'm encouraged by, when you look at the players now, Chris Inglis, the cyber director, Jen Easterly, the director of CISSA, Ann Newberger, also over there on the presidential staff. They all came from NSA at the same time. They were all working together at the same time. I was there at Cybercom in uniform as the China mission lead when Chris Inglis was the deputy of the National Security Agency. I'm encouraged that the people that all knew how to work together at the fort are now all out at different organizations doing different missions. So I'd like to say, if there's ever been a time that I think you were going to see the government come together and work together towards common goals, it's now. And if it's not now, it might never happen. Because I used to work with them. I represent the Navy. There's other specific points of contact within the Air Force and the Army. So a lot of the talk, the president has used a lot of talk about how we're going to respond to these things. And you always get back to this idea of attribution, right? It always comes, if we can, hey, it's hard to figure out how we're going to respond if we can't really, attribute the activity to some organization directly. I think we're getting better with the attribution problem. But to quote something that Chris Inglis said in an article that came out just today, if I see a piece of equipment that it's attacking me, again, sorry, I'm playing against my own rules. So let's just say a piece of equipment that's delivering cyber effects against me. I might have to respond to, do something to degrade that piece of equipment's ability to operate. Maybe in that instance, I don't have to attribute that piece of equipment to anybody if that's the thing that I know I have to engage to make the pain go away. After the fact, you might want to bring additional pain to the perpetrators of who did that. That's a different response for different people at different time, but maybe the immediate action is to take a shot, again, Chris Inglis, cyber bullet against that piece of equipment. So I think those things, you might begin to see that stuff happen a little more frequently, and then work towards pulling the thread on who is actually responsible, and then figuring out how to attribute and maybe respond in other means and methods, right? For those of you who are familiar with the DIME, diplomatic, information, military, economic. There's lots of levers of power that can be pulled to respond to these things, and then you take a whole of nation approach to responding to any one, whether it be a criminal activity or a nation state activity, and you don't necessarily have to pull the military lever in responding to it. It could be a diplomatic, information, or economic means. Sanctions, as an example. We just put a bunch of sanctions on Russia, I think over the poisoning of that. I forget the reason why. I'm rambling a little bit. Let's see. I think that's the questions. Ooh, does our cyber defense include attacks to civilian organizations and public infrastructure? So William, does our cyber defense include attacks to? Well, all right, so yeah. So from a whole nation perspective, one of the things that DoD realizes, particularly when we created Cybercom and DISA and these other organizations, that these organizations sort of existed to protect ourselves, our own networks. Okay, that's great. But the Department of Defense exists to protect the homeland. I know General Nakasone takes a very hard stance on this, that when called upon, we need to be prepared to respond. Again, this is under the authorities of the President of the United States, and the combatant commanders in place when directed to do certain things. And I would believe that, yes, if we did see deliberate attacks on civilian organizations and public infrastructure, is something that the Department of Defense and Department of Homeland Security, principally this is what's been hung around Jen Easterly's put on her shoulders to figure out how to solve, as the civilian organization looking at how to defend critical infrastructure. There is going to come a time that they're going to have to leverage additional resources, i.e. maybe capabilities that exist within the Department of Defense, to adequately respond against these things. Those conversations are going on now. But I absolutely would agree that any attacks on civilian organizations and public infrastructure, again, using the definition of it, of I said, using the word an attack, something designed to degrade or destroy an ability, or lead to the loss of life and limb, absolutely would be something that we would respond to. With CMC rolling out towards 2022 and some of the drama of the process, is there sufficient leadership considering a cyber principal advisor vacancy? So I guess if what you're getting at, because there's no, with the administration, the new administration coming in, I'm assuming that that's kind of leading to that there's nobody acting as the principal cyber advisor at the OSD level right now. That's true and untrue. So there's a Jennifer Walsh, who is, I think in the OSD policy organization, is currently acting. She's the acting principal cyber advisor at the OSD level, and all the other services are staffed. I'm for the Department of the Navy. There's a gentleman named Terry Mitchell who does it for the Department of the Army, and a woman named Wanda Jones-Heath, who is the Department of the Air Force's principal cyber advisor. And then the deputy principal cyber advisor is Rear Admiral Jeff Scheit, who's the uniformed individual. But so I think the leadership's there. I'm not going to argue that there isn't drama still around CMMC. I know with Katie Arrington as the ANS CISO was pushing that very, very heavily. It's taken some fits and starts. It's certainly something that is going to have more issues moving forward. Fundamentally, I get what CMMC was designed to do, and I can't say that I'm not supportive of it. But again, the devil's in the details. Having come from industry, having trying to figure out how to respond to those things, it's not inexpensive or easy to do some of the things that CMMC has called out. And yeah, it incurs costs within those respective industries that will, of course, come right back to the Department of Defense to ultimately pay for. So, CMMC's got a few more strides to make before we think it's either acceptable or if it's even going to survive. All right, Richard. I think with that was about. Well, I ranted for about 40 minutes or so. I guess back to you.
Thanks, Christopher. That was very enlightening. A lot of good stuff. Um, you mentioned other PACs. Do you, as a group, do you guys actually meet and discuss?
Oh yeah, yeah. We met. We were literally talking right before this call. That's who I was speaking with before I jumped on this call. So
Can you share anything about those discussions? Clearly not anything confidential, but just the workings of from a strategic level. Anything that I think the audience would be curious to know how that's working.
Yeah. So the three fundamental jobs of the PCA or the PCAs were to, advise our respective secretaries, to oversee the implementation of the DoD cyber strategy. And then the more contentious thing was this idea of weighing in on the adequacy of the cyberspace activities budget, broken into those three areas that I called out earlier: cybersecurity, cyber resiliency, critical infrastructure weapon systems, and then cyber operations. Think the cyber mission force and the things that the mission force needs to go off and do its job. Well, one of the things we've figured out is like, look, each of the services view cyber a little bit differently. And this idea of adequacy of how we spend our money, well, you really have to have a clear idea of what you're trying to do. What is that horizon you're chasing to determine whether the money that we're spending in the cyberspace activities budget is enough to get us there. There's a Navy captain. I quote him all the time. He's one of my favorite people. He says he's an F-18 pilot, or a former F-18 pilot, so he has to use aviation jargon when he talks. So we're all a lot of thrust, no vector, right? The DoD is spending a lot of money in cyber. We're not really maybe getting as quickly to the places we want to be getting to. And this idea, and I think that was another idea of reason why they brought the PCAs and created us, because as an organization, the department, when the Hill was asking the services all these different cyber questions, I think they'd have to ask 9 or 10 different organizations, to get to an answer. So a lot of the reasons the PCA were brought together was to being that single belly button of the respective services, so we would try and figure out what the answer to that question was, as opposed to 9 different people answering the questions 9 different ways. But when we all get together, we come from different backgrounds. I come from a very operational, war fighting background. Terry Mitchell's come from the intelligence community. He's been in the Pentagon for 1 million years. He really understands acquisition and money and resources and the way that building works. Wanda Jones-Heath comes from a very, very strong, cybersecurity background. And when you put us all together, we form like this perfect entity. Individually, we all have our strengths and weaknesses, but that's fair to say about anybody who's in this space. Nobody understands everything about cybersecurity, whether or cyber warfare, let alone how to do it, how to acquire tools, how to pay for it, how to fight for resourcing, and how to really, I think one of the biggest reasons the PCA exists is to really kind of champion this idea that cyber is a warfighting domain, and our services need to take it seriously, not just do stuff, but consider it core to the way they're going to conduct their missions, and then it'll start getting the attention it deserves. And right now, we're struggling to get that, to get parity with our other warfighting brethren. I'll leave it at that. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah. One side comment about that, and maybe you can elaborate. Is there a strategy where each of the services is tasked with certain aspects of an overarching approach that will help the resilience in our defenses? Yeah.
So the way the COCOMs are set up, I'm gonna half answer your question, I think. So the way the organization of U.S. Cybercom is set up is there's U.S. Cybercom, General Nakasone, he's the big cheese. And then each of the services have what they call a Joint Force Headquarters Cyber, and then it's Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps. Each one of those Joint Force Headquarters are sort of married up with other combatant commanders. So like as an example, the Navy and Marine Corps resources, we are really married to the Indo-PACOM commander. It makes sense, right? That's mostly where the Navy's attention is, in the Pacific Theater of Operation. The Army is aligned to U.S. Central Command. The Air Force is aligned to U.S. European Command, as an example, right? I think the Navy also has U.S. SOCOM. The Marine Corps had U.S. Special Operations Command. And you can see that you guys could Google that and find out the alignment. So when it comes to covering geographically, the services are somewhat supporting specific combatant commanders where that service is mostly involved. I mean, you can make sense, right? If you looked at U.S. Central Command, it was mostly an Army fight, and Air Force to a degree or another. And then we mix and match, right? So the Navy has 40 mission teams, but yet we have maybe a mission team that supports one of the other areas because there's a naval component of that mission over there. So, most of our teams are over in Indo-PACOM, but we might have one supporting US CENTCOM because, it does border the Mediterranean Ocean, and, there's things that go on inside that body of water. Similarly for all the other ones, the Air Force have teams that support us, the Army has teams that support Air Force, et cetera. But when it comes to like technologies, we don't really break it out and say, well, Navy, you're going to expert on industrial control systems, and Army, you figure out how to respond to financial things. We don't break it out that way, if that was the question you were asking.
No, I think I speak for a lot of my peers. We just love a coordinated approach, because we always remember the hard lesson at 9/11, where all different agencies knew a little bit, and if they'd only come together and shared, right?
Yeah, even the president's executive order, spelled out specifically, we got to get better about sharing information. We've all known that. I mean, that's one of the things, that's not a secret, right? But we all struggle with how to do, still to this day, struggle with how to do it. I mean, it gets better. I mean, there are centers of collaboration, and a lot of it's done, strangely enough, just through relationships. And the systems to pass that information are improving every day, but there's so much data out there. I mean, there's so much information. How do you process that and make it, how do you go from data to information to intelligence? I think that's the thought process. So yeah, not easy.
I was discussing something with some peers a couple of weeks ago. I'm very nervous, or should I not be, about the vulnerability of our undersea cables. I mean, if something happens to that, we're in hot water.
Another article, there was another article written this morning just about that, right? Because that's probably what you're referencing. Yeah, that's hard, right? And then we had said some of it's intentional, and others ships drag an anchor, right? It's just some people can intentionally get access to these things, and they're just physical things living on the floor of the ocean. Verizon, actually, when I was working at Verizon, there's people who do it very, very well. And Verizon tells a really, really good story about the tsunami in the Pacific and the earthquake in the Indian Ocean. And they have these presentations where they show all the different transatlantic cables going through and how these cables broke. Like 9 cables broken in 27 areas. But because they used sort of a mesh networking transport layer, that as long as there was a path, information figured a way to get there, because again, using this mesh network. And then within some ridiculous amount of time, like less than 20 days or so, all those cables were repaired. Now, 20 days of outages or reduced bandwidth through these things is not good, right? And anybody can go online and search where these cable landing stations are. New Jersey, there's 2 buildings just on the Hudson River where most of these cables land. There's a building in Miami called the Building of the Americas, again, where like all traffic from South America lands in one cable junction. You could turn off the whole continent of South America from the rest of the world by dropping a bomb on this building in Miami. Again, but it's public knowledge.
Right. So, I think there's certain schools of thought that a lot of our critical infrastructure has not been attacked. For several reasons. One, the FBI is very active and has probably prevented some attacks that we just don't know about, right? Thanks to them. But I think some of the adversaries, some of the nation states are like a little cautious that if they cross that line, then they could potentially be engaging us kinetically or some other way. So there's a lot of discussion about us stepping up our game, eye for an eye kind of thing. Even if it's not kinetic, there are other things. And, you talked about sanctions. But if we do step up our cyber attacks, then does something like the undersea cable become more of a viable target? And how do we defend that? Really?
Well, and you bring up a good point. And every time we talk about escalating, particularly with cyber, we'll hack back, right? People say, look, the problem with that is the U.S. has the most to lose, and we do, right? I mean, we're probably collectively the most vulnerable. We rely on these systems a lot more than maybe other parts of the world. And yeah, undersea cables are vulnerable to just about anything. Yeah, it is a huge problem. So I was given a statistic the other day. There's a program within the Department of Defense called Mosaics. You guys might all be interested. It's more situational awareness of industrial control systems. It was a joint capability technology demonstration at JCTD being run to say, how we can bring more situational awareness to industrial control systems. And it was this 3-year effort. One of the interesting facts they threw out, I don't know how, if it's a fact or it's just people say, is 1/3 of all cyber activity, I'll use the word activity, is focused at critical infrastructure. Okay, well, that's disconcerting for a couple reasons. Because there's no intrinsic intelligence to be gained or value to be derived from looking at Baltimore Gas and Electric, right? I'll just use it because that's my local energy provider. Now, if I'm trying to hack into Siemens and I'm an adversary, well, maybe I'm trying to steal your intellectual property because I want to go build these pieces of equipment and compete with you, or build them and just roll them in my own country. Got it. There's an intelligence and potentially a financial value to be gained from that. But if you're cruising through the actual organizations that have bought this equipment and are using it to do whatever that critical infrastructure is, that's disconcerting. You're really only, in my opinion, you're only there for one reason. And that's what again, I'll use this preparation of the environment. Because when I need to engage you, and if I want to engage your critical infrastructure, now I know how to, pipeline attack, right? The ransomware attack. That could be part of it. So yeah, that does keep me up at night.
Definitely. Well, I want to thank you for engaging and giving us a lot of food for thought, and also sharing some of the inner workings of how things are working in our military, and what helps us sleep at night. So thank you for that. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And I look forward to potentially being able to meet you in person somewhere at some conference someplace. And
yeah, it'll happen now that we're kind of getting out and about, although we are sort of feels like we're going back in the other direction. And you guys live in California. It's crazy out there. I'm on the East Coast. We're it doesn't seem as oppressive. I don't know. I don't live in California. I just know that you guys are not having a good run of it.
No, we're gathering outdoors, because a lot of the cities where we live have expanded their outdoor capabilities. So people sitting in, the restaurants are full outdoors on the weekends, and even nights during happy hour. So life seems like it's back to normal. Pentagon was going in the other, like we're back to not a minimum manning, but 40% manning. So they're trying to encourage people to work from home as much as possible. Right.
Some restrictions to travel, but I don't think you're in one of the hot spots for us. So yeah, you might see me out there.
All right, it'd be great. In the meantime, stay safe, you and your family and friends, and keep up the good fight. And we'll hopefully see you at some point.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I appreciate it. I enjoyed it.
And the rest of you who are watching, same to you. Stay safe. And again, tapping onto the words that Christopher said, we hope to have our security summit back. We're planning it for the first week of May in 2022. So mark your calendars. Hopefully there won't be too many more variants, and we'll be able to actually go forth with that. In the meantime, stay safe. We'll see you next month at our amazing ransomware panel. So long.